Hello and welcome to the Valley. Today I am your host, Janet Michael. It is Community Health Day, sponsored by Valley Health, where each month we tackle a health issue or a problem of some sort. We've talked about heart disease, colon cancer, mental health, skin cancer, even hospice in the hospital. Today we've got a timely topic, heat strokes. We recorded this conversation several weeks ago when the feels like temps were well over 100 degrees, though this week it feels pretty close. Dr. Greg Byrd is joining me. Dr. Byrd practices internal medicine at Valley Health Shenandoah Memorial Hospital Multi-Specialty Clinic. He's accepting new patients, by the way. So he joins me to talk about the signs of heat stroke and what you should do if it happens to you or someone near you. Dr. Byrd, we're going to talk a little bit today about all of the heat-related things that people can experience, not even when it's 110 degrees outside. It could just be 80 with high humidity levels. There are a lot of things that people need to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is such a timely subject because this is the time that we really do see a lot of heat injuries. And basically, the big thing that we worry about is something called heat stroke. That's a pretty severe problem. And really what that's defined as is severe elevated temperature, elevated core body temperature with what we call central nervous system dysfunction. So that can be altered mental status, confusion, delirium, seizures. That is a true medical emergency. What tends to happen is that when the body overheats, now normally what the body does is it cools a couple of different ways. One is that a mechanism that the body cools by is that blood vessels on the skin dilate, shunting more blood flow to that area and letting off heat from the inner core of the body outward. Also sweating. And as we sweat and that sweat evaporates, that also helps the body to cool. The problem is that this time of year, when it's very hot and very humid, the sweating adaptation isn't as good, because you don't really evaporate as well when it's 80% humidity out there. So that can be a problem. And then as the core body temperature rises, the oxygen consumption and metabolic rate increase, your heart rate increases, your respiratory rate increases, more blood flow goes to the external parts of the body, less to the internal parts. And that can set off an inflammatory response that can lead to all sorts of problems, what we tend to call multi-system organ failure.
Wow.
A lot of organs don't get deprived of blood flow. There are some changes that happen in the core of the body that really set off this really very dangerous and life-threatening cascade of problems. And there's really two types of heat stroke. We call it exertional and non-exertional. The exertional is self-explanatory. That generally tends to occur to young people. A couple times a year, you hear about football camp in the summer, where you get somebody who goes down and even occasionally dies because of heat stroke. So exertional is basically young people who are engaging in really heavy activity outdoors. Again, football players, training camps, also athletes. Many years ago, when I was in basic training in the Army, I was at Fort Campbell in July. They really emphasized the importance of keeping us in the shade, keeping us well hydrated, because of that risk. So part one is the exertional. And again, that tends to occur more in young people. But the other, the classical, is non-exertional. And that tends to occur in the extremes of age. Either very old, especially very old, but also the very young are also at risk. And also people with chronic disease are at higher risk for heat stroke. And that people with things like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, heart disease, history of stroke, obesity, people with physical disability, and pregnant women. These people are all at higher risk for significant heat injury if they're spending too much time out in the heat without getting proper hydration. Other things that can predispose, especially this time of year when you're having parties outside and picnics, is people who overdo it in alcohol. So alcohol will definitely put you at a much higher risk of having heat stroke. And then recreational drugs like cocaine also puts you at higher risk. There are also certain medications like a diuretic, because that causes you to lose fluid. So that can contribute to higher risk, and other medicines like beta blockers, which a lot of our heart patients would take. So those are important things also to think about. And this time of year, it probably goes without saying, but I'll say it. We should never be leaving our children or our pets out in the car in really hot temperatures. even with the window cracked down, the temperature really goes up. So we need to be very careful with our pets and our kids, not leave them in cars, or if you do, for a short period of time, because they're definitely going to be at risk. Also, people that don't have proper shelter, don't have air conditioning, people who are socially isolated can be at higher risk. And then, of course, the big one is people that aren't drinking enough water, lack of water intake. That's certainly a big one. And that kind of leads to the question of somebody may ask, okay, how much water should we be drinking? And on a regular day, a man should drink about 3.7 liters of fluid a day, a woman 2.7 liters. So if you think of one of the 2-liter bottles of soda, a man should be drinking basically about 2 of those, and a woman about 1.5. So that should be your standard liquid intake on a normal day. Now, if you're going to be outdoors in the heat, if it's really humid, you're going to want to increase that. Now, there's no magic number as to how high it should be increased, but a couple of things to think about. First off, if you're thirsty, drink. By all means, drink. That's your body telling you that you need water. The other thing is to pay attention to the color of your urine. If your urine is really dark, that's a sign that your urine is concentrated and your body is trying to hang on to fluid. So you should drink enough liquid, primarily water, but coffee, tea, juices, they all work. But your urine should be either clear or very light colored. And that's a real clue to let you know if you're drinking enough. And if that urine starts to have a stronger odor or be dark in color, that's a sign you're not drinking enough. For a heat stroke, the mortality actually can be really high. When people get brought into the emergency room, it's anywhere, studies show, from 21 to 63% of people brought in an emergency room with heat stroke end up dying. And again, to go back to what I said at the beginning, heat stroke is a severely elevated core body temperature with CNS dysfunction, central nervous system dysfunction. So again, that's somebody's acting weird. They're confused. They're delirious. They're just agitated. They're not behaving right. So if you're at an outdoor cookout, family gathering, church softball game out in the heat, something like that, and you notice somebody's behaving strangely, that's a sign that this person really should be brought to medical attention fairly quickly, because they could well be suffering from heat injury. And the faster you get them to attention, the more likely we're going to be in the hospital to be able to save their life. So
Are there things that in that moment you shouldn't do? Like, should you not wrap them in cold, wet blankets or force them to drink water at that stage? Are there things that people think you should do that are wrong?
No, as a matter of fact, drinking water is good. And if you have somebody who actually collapses, they may not be sweating. Their skin may be red and hot and dry, which again is a worrisome sign, because that's a sign that they're probably volume depleted. And that, of course, puts them at higher risk for heat injury. If you're at a place like, for example, on a sports field, and a player goes down and it's really hot and they're unconscious or delirious or whatever, you want to cool them as fast as possible. And if you have the ability to have like a portable tub or a bathtub or something like that, you get them into that tub and fill it with ice and water, try to cool them as quickly as possible while you're calling 911. Because the faster you can get this person cooled down, that's a potentially life-saving thing that you really need to do. So cold water immersion is key. If you don't have that and you've got ice, you lay them down and you cover them with ice. Dump a cooler of ice on them, whatever you can do. Cool mist fans, whatever you have. And then in the hospital, we can do that as well. We also have cooling blankets, cool IV fluids, things of that nature that we would be giving to people. But it's awareness. If you're in a group of people, making sure everybody's got plenty to drink and they continue to drink. And I think really it's just a matter of being aware of what could happen. But probably the big thing to watch for is somebody who starts acting odd, because that's a sign of impending heat stroke. And that person really should be cooled down as quickly as possible.
We're going to take a quick break and come back with the rest of our conversation with Dr. Gregory Byrd from Valley Health Shenandoah Memorial Hospital Multi-Specialty Clinic. Got a few hours to give? You could make a local nonprofit's day. On September 19th, United Way NSV invites you to join over 900 volunteers for Day of Caring, the region's biggest single-day volunteer event. You'll help nonprofits across the valley by painting, landscaping, organizing donations, or doing light repairs, whatever's needed. No special skills, just a willingness to help. Whether you're solo or part of a team, your time will make a real difference. Sign up today at unitedwaynsv.org/day of caring. Be part of something bigger. Help us care for the Valley together. Welcome back to the Valley Today. I am your host, Janet Michael. It is Community Health Day, sponsored by Valley Health, where each month we tackle a health issue of some sort. Today we're talking with Dr. Gregory Byrd from Valley Health Shenandoah Memorial Hospital Multi-Specialty Clinic about heat strokes, heat exhaustion, and the two types of heat injury. I think a lot of these heat-related problems don't get the priority in the minds of most people. They think, oh, they're just overheated. Have them go sit under the tree and get cooled off and they'll be fine. But what I'm hearing you say is a heat stroke in its real form could lead to a lot of other problems medically.
Yeah, you can die. People die every year for heat stroke. And so again, the key is they're hot and they're having central nervous system dysfunction. Do what you can to cool them down. Pour water on them, whatever you can do, get them to drink. If you have ice, put the ice on them, cool them down. That's the number one life-saving thing that you can do. And again, call 911, get the squad out there, get them to the emergency room as quickly as possible. But the first priority is to cool them down.
I've heard the phrase heat exhaustion. Is that just a variation of a heat stroke? Is that something different?
Yeah, it's a variation. It's basically a heat injury. You're becoming volume depleted. Your cardiac output isn't quite as good. Your temperature's elevated, but you don't have the confusion, the delirium, the central nervous system issues. So this is somebody who's still thinking clearly, but they may be pretty exhausted, weak. I can't do this. I've got to go sit down. I'm pretty wiped out, but they're thinking clearly. The big distinction with heat stroke is that they're not thinking clearly.
I would then assume that if not attended to, that heat exhaustion could rise to the level of a heat stroke.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we need to watch out for each other. Also keeping in mind the people that are at the highest risk. But you're very young, you're very old, people on certain medications, people with certain diseases, cardiovascular disease, and pregnant women. And again, when we're out in social groups in this type of heat, we should be encouraging each other to be sure we drink.
It's also important to understand that it doesn't always happen while you're outside in the heat of the sun. You could have a grandparent that is in their home and doesn't have air conditioning or doesn't have cooling mechanisms in their house, and they could happen to them on their sofa.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, in heat like this, if you don't have air conditioning, if you don't have proper shelter, and social isolation is another big deal because nobody's there to watch out for them. And once they start to get confused or something, and there's nobody to cool them down or call 911 or get help, that's a really high risk situation. So yeah, you're absolutely right. So anytime you are in a hot, humid environment, which can be indoors, that becomes another potential situation where somebody could really suffer a significant heat injury.
When you mentioned earlier that you see this a lot, the exertional part of it in younger people, football teams, for example, we see that actually a lot. Yeah. Particularly now, training camp is about to start for the Commanders. You see that on a college level. There have been college athletes, like you mentioned, that have died from participating in these camps. Yeah,
they really do, which is why every smart coach is hydrating their players and making sure. Again, when I was in the military, I was in basic training in July, and we did a lot of marching and we did a lot of heavy physical activity in the middle of the day, but they always were careful to take breaks periodically, and your canteen had better be full and you better fill it up every chance you get. And they really emphasize, guys, look at your urine. If it's dark, you are not drinking enough.
Is it something that you can build a tolerance for? So let's say you have a 10-year-old who plays soccer. Can you keep them hydrated? Will they over time build a tolerance to be able to be hotter, that it isn't as much of an impact, or is that a myth?
I think that's a myth. I think it could affect everybody and anybody. I think younger people can tolerate it more, but as you just mentioned, the example of football players, college football players, they're well-conditioned athletes. And yet every year there are heat injuries with these football players. because again, the body has mechanisms to cool. And when you're out in a hot environment and you have not been drinking enough, and the body is no longer able to cool to the point that the core temperature hits sometimes 105 degrees or higher, the body is not built to withstand that. And so it definitely takes a toll. Some people die still, young people.
Listening to the weather these last few weeks, I've joked with my husband because they'll say the temperature is going to be 92, but it's going to feel like it's 112. And my
Yeah.
argument is 92 is hot enough. To me, 112 feels like 92. So I don't understand the difference, but we really should pay attention to that because that factors in to
Yeah.
what we've been talking about.
Sure. Because again, the humidity, it's not just the heat, it's the humidity. Because the humidity can impair the body's ability to cool itself by evaporation of sweat. You sweat, the sweat doesn't evaporate. So you're not cooling yourself as efficiently, putting you at risk for heat stroke. So it's extremes of age, certain medications, alcohol, cocaine, and just not drinking enough. And extended time of exposure out in hot, humid areas. That's the big thing.
And particularly, like you said, this time of year, people are going on beach vacations, they're
Sure.
going to the lake, they're going out fishing all day, and they really need to consider what kind of atmosphere and environment they're in and prepare for it. It's not that hard to bring extra water with you.
Yep. And it can be life-saving.
So the important thing is stay hydrated and
Stay
call
hydrated.
911 as you're cooling this person down. Don't try to cool them down and wait to call 911. Call
Right.
911 and
Yep.
then try and get them cooled down.
Yeah, when you have somebody you suspect has heat injury, heat stroke, cool them down as fast as possible. If you've got a tub that you can put them in with cold water and ice, do it. If all you have is ice and you can cover with ice, do it. If all you have is cold beverages that you can pour on them, do it. Getting somebody's core body temperature cooled as quickly as possible. So knowing what to look for, who's at risk, and if you see somebody having problems that looks like it, move fast. Because the faster you can get them cooled off, the more likely you are to save their life.
Dr. Byrd, thank you for taking some time to explain all of this to me. I am going to go put water in my car as soon as we're done talking so that it's always there.
Good move.
I appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
I will be back tomorrow with a brand new episode of The Valley Today, a few minutes after noon. Karen Poff is going to join me from the Extension office. We're going to talk about your money habitudes. Meet me back here for that just a few minutes after noon.